Let's start our deeper dive with the I-Team's Erica Stapleton, looking at the consequences of teen gun violence, how it reverberates throughout the community, and how hard it is to prevent. We begin with the story of three families linked forever through tragedy.
Picture after picture.
He's a superstar at sports.
Filling Raul Escobar's living room wall.
You seem very proud.
Yeah.
An attempt to fill the void.
All the struggles that I went through life to where I'm at now, he went through it with me. Now he's gone.
His son Efrain was 16 when he was shot and killed in 2021, gunned down at a gas station in Buckeye by another teenager.
He was a good friend, a good brother, a great son, and he had a bright future ahead of him.
Eric Buchanan, according to the court records, was almost 17 at the time when he was caught on camera firing more than a dozen shots at Efrain, a fragment from one bullet striking Eric's sister's foot. The shooting, according to court records, all over a girl.
He took my son's life for no good reason.
At 17 years old, Eric Buchanan should have never had a gun. But if you follow the paper trail of his murder case through the court system, you can get a sense of what led him to that moment. His attorney lays out a childhood that was, quote, chaotic and confusing.
Such as drug abuse, domestic violence, and homelessness. A lack of consistently positive role models, the financial insecurity, all contributed to rob Eric of his childhood.
And less than a year after Eric killed Efrain, his parents were arrested, not in Efrain's murder.
And they, unfortunately, were comfortable having lots of guns around.
But in a different firearm tragedy.
The other boy pulled the gun, pulled the trigger, it went through my son.
A 16-year-old relative of Eric's parents shot and killed 19-year-old Adrian Ballou inside the family's home. Adrian's mom, Latina, still devastated.
It's very hard as a mom to wrap my head around because I just ask why was my son there?
Police called it an accident as the teens were playing around with the gun. But Eric's parents were charged and convicted of hindering prosecution after hiding the firearms and lying to the investigators. Eric's father was also convicted for having a gun when he already had a criminal record and was a prohibited possessor.
Just tried to cover things up.
Records show the 16-year-old shooter spent time in juvie and took a plea deal for manslaughter in juvenile court.
How many families have lost their children because of poor decisions they've made to have these guns around?
Efrain would have graduated high school this year.
He had goals, he had it all.
But instead, his family is facing his killer in court.
Please don't come up here and say you're sorry because you're not.
Eric was charged as an adult and in the end took a plea deal, pleading guilty to second-degree murder and aggravated assault for grazing his sister. Despite that, his sister stood by him at sentencing.
He isn't the bad person everybody thinks he is.
So did his grandma.
He's a good kid. He has a good heart.
And his mom, now on probation.
My son is a loving, protective person.
Eric himself, now 18, accepted responsibility before a judge sentenced him to 25 years in prison.
I'm sorry for your loss and pain. If I could turn back the clock and change things, I would. Unfortunately, I can't.
The gun he used to kill Efrain was never recovered, so there's no way to trace where he got it, although Buckeye police indicate it was given to him by an adult.
We wanted the death penalty, but because he was a minor when it happened, they couldn't do that.
Three families.
It's something that no parent ever thinks they're ever gonna go through.
Losing 3 kids.
And now that my son is going away, my heart is broke.
From guns.
Make sure your kids know how much you love them, because you never know if it may be the last time you see them.
Sometimes it really can be inherently good people making a bad decision once, that one moment changing so many lives forever. Erica joins us now. As we discuss this, we'd like you to be a part of this conversation as we try to get a better understanding of this basic question. Where are teens getting these guns? Text us what you know, what you think at 602-444-1212. And Erica, what do we know about teens and guns?
You know, we've been looking into this for a while, and we know that more teens are dying by guns, but what some limited research shows is that there is a rise in teen perpetrators too. Specifically, ATF shows the number of kids 17 and younger who have had guns seized or taken away from them more than doubled in 5 years from 2017 to 2021, from 117 teens to 277 in 2021, the most recent year available.
So it's the availability of those weapons for teens to get their hands on.
Yes. And, you know, you see it more and more. This is, again, something we've been reporting for a while. And Yeah, it just keeps happening. Unfortunately, there's never a lack of stories to be reported on when it comes to teens either killing others or teens getting shot.
And how is this happening?
You know, there's not a ton of data on that, but the data we have been able to get to, look at, doesn't tell us exactly how the teens are getting the guns. What we do know, that's one of the reasons why we want to hear from viewers who may have had experience with this issue. Most of what we heard has been anecdotal evidence. We had limited opportunities to hear from the Maricopa County attorney and just a few minutes with the Phoenix police chief about guns getting into the wrong hands. But we were also able to sit down at length with current and former ATF agents. And they all agree right now it's too easy for someone who should not have a gun to get one.
It's not hard, obviously, to get a gun because we see folks that shouldn't have them all the time. They're derived a number of different ways, whether it be through straw purchasers, people who go out and purchase guns and provide them to individuals, through theft. Unfortunately, it's way too easy for criminals to get their hands on guns.
Kids have exposure to other families' cars and houses, or they know a house is vacant. I mean, it's endless the possibilities. So there's a saturation of firearms in the United States. They're easily accessible. And so the question is, how could they not get them, really?
Unfortunately, you're seeing more and more crimes being committed with firearms where juveniles are involved and teenagers, right? People under 18 years of age.
Once that trigger is pulled, or once that person gets close to 18 or becomes 18, it's a very different story that I don't want to see happen to our kids. And so I think we as a society really need to take a careful look at that.
Okay, so maybe that's the how they're getting the guns, because they're readily available. But what about the why? Why do teens want the guns so badly? What's the appeal here?
I've been covering teen gun violence for weeks now, as we said, and the families that I talk to keep saying one of the same things I've heard over and over is that kids at parties, they have guns with them out with their friends. It's just all too normal. And that's one thing that really bothers former ATF agent Bernard Zaper. He currently teaches criminal justice at ASU, and he shared why he thinks this is becoming more common. Take a listen.
And they're being normalized to this. They're getting normalized through television, online videos, the increase in shootings and violent crime in the U.S. And again, the seeking of self, of ego, and it's becoming normalized. And that's very dangerous.
We'll continue our deeper dive on the issue after the break, taking a closer look at how teen gun violence can be prevented, as well as potential solutions that could be created at the state level.
Sometimes the violence is intentional, but in many instances, it's unintentional. A tragic accident that adds to the tragic statistics of teen deaths caused by gunfire. And Erica, tonight you're sharing the story of a family literally living through hell because of one of those accidents.
Yeah, and it's clearly frustrating for law enforcement, but for families like Adrian's, he's the teen that was killed while he and his friend were playing with guns, they want to see more work to prevent tragedies like his.
The holidays just aren't the same.
We talk about Adrian all the time.
His picture at the table.
We include him in things.
Because he's not there in person.
This would be the last time I saw my son.
A few weeks after Valentine's Day 2022.
Brought his mom flowers. He just wanted people to know that they were important.
19-year-old Adrian Ballou, shot and killed by a 16-year-old friend while they were playing with guns. The friend went to juvie and took a plea deal for manslaughter.
He acknowledged that he has to live the rest of his life knowing that he took his friend's life. And that's hard for a 16-year-old to think about.
Adrian's mom, Latina, didn't know the family and thought Adrian would know better.
There's no such thing as a perfect child. Kids make mistakes, and kids don't always think about the consequences of what they're doing. And it's more about the adults in this picture who had no regards for the safety or kids thinking about the safety of the weapons that they have accessible to them.
Two of the 16-year-old's adult relatives pleaded guilty to hindering the prosecution after they lied to police and hid the guns. One of the adults was a prohibited possessor and was also convicted for having a weapon. Court records show both adults are on probation now.
This still doesn't seem real to this day.
Adrian's older sisters, Mariah and Chelsea.
That's one of the things that you'll never unhear, is that cry from my siblings, from my mom. It's not something that you can do to make them feel better.
Both are parents themselves,
And I never in a million years would just leave a gun laying around.
who worry just how easy it can be for kids these days to get guns.
Seems pretty easy.
Their family wants to see harsher punishments for adults and limits on access when it comes to kids.
If you're going to have weapons, then you need to make sure that there's safety mechanisms in place. You shouldn't have them laying around and accessible for kids.
Any kind of change to ensure deaths like Adrian's don't keep happening.
I think this one just makes me proud.
Adrian's dreams cut short.
He wanted to be a firefighter.
He wanted to save lives, and maybe sharing his story and how his death should have been prevented will do just that.
We don't want him to be forgotten.
Latina, Adrian's mom, works in a hospital and sees other teens with gunshot wounds, which is hard for her to see, but also indicates this is happening to other families. You know, and to note, her family isn't against guns, but they want to see more education and consequences for parents and other adults who are irresponsible, which is one issue that our team has reported on before, and an issue that came before the Arizona state legislature earlier this year. It's known as Christian's Law, named for Christian Patillo, who was killed at a friend's house when a gun wasn't locked up. The law would have required that guns and ammo are locked up, or else gun owners could face a fine, but it didn't pass. That's something that other families we talked to said they wanted more: responsibility for private gun owners and penalties if they don't keep guns locked up or away from kids. Another idea is a law that other states have requiring gun owners to report if their gun is stolen. Arizona does not make that a requirement, though many people still do report if a gun is stolen. And right now that boils down to personal responsibility for gun owners. The ATF's most recent data shows that overwhelmingly, most guns that are stolen aren't coming from gun stores or sellers, but they're actually stolen from private citizens, like from homes or even cars.
All right, as promised, we want to get to some of your thoughts on this grim reality we're all dealing with in America. Earlier, we asked you to text us your thoughts on gun violence in teens. Here's what some of you had to say. And Erica, you can react to this. Our producer has edited, we want you to know, some of these comments for length and clarity. This is from Bruce in Phoenix. He says, and this is right along the lines of what you were reporting a second ago, Erica, I would hold the parents accountable. They have to know that something is not right when they're with their teen and find out what's going on. They need to lock up their guns and they need to monitor their teen's behavior.
You know, I think it's not just parents. I think it's any adult who has a gun and has kids in their household, because it could be friends coming over. And something I talked about with Adrian's sisters was that, you know, you have to have open conversations about that with, you know, other adults and then teenagers as well. Your kids, as they're growing up, they should know the risks that are involved here.
Another shared a similar sentiment. This is Louise from Paradise Valley. She says the issue of teen gun violence is awful and out of control. Where are they getting the guns if they're underage? If parents are enabling, they need to be held accountable too. It seems to be a common theme.
Yeah, it's a common theme, and I think there's so many avenues where this can go down, especially if you have a friend or, like, you know, some of our former ATF agents said, like, it could be an empty house. It's a crime of opportunity, potentially, if they want to go and take something. So it's, you know, and sometimes the consequences, you know, there's not a lot of thought into the long term there.
And that is the crux of what we've been talking about. A good person with one bad moment, a mistake, an accident, and lives are changed forever.
Or lost.
Or lost. Yeah, absolutely.